first speaker
Yes.
is Carmen Endo, and Carmen's interesting fact, and this is one that's going to be hard to top. She once spent an entire day with the king and queen of Greece.
Wow. Okay, I found that interesting.
I think people are in wow mode. That's a big
wow.
deal.
Okay.
And with that, Carmen.
Yes, Carmen.
He's the deposed king of Greece, if you ever want to learn about the history. But okay. Good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm not supposed to be up here if it were not for Steve's insistence. So I want to thank Gray. This is my third year of being here, and I don't really talk. And I want to thank Gray and his wife Vicky and his mother-in-law Joan for all that they do and for making this like what I consider my adopted hometown conference. I consider GothamGo like my conference. Yeah. And yeah, so I'll get to it. I also want to thank Steve and Mark for being who they are. Because I just can't imagine like a GothamGo without them emceeing and their banter and everything. So anyway. Okay, we tend to have this view that people who are up on stage are up here because they're authorities on a subject. But I think that really only applies to 10% of us. The conference talks that I most thoroughly enjoyed in the past were just about regular people sharing their personal experiences and the things that they've learned or their insights into their specific problems through stories. That's why stories are important. There's a social media account called Humans of New York. Who's heard of it? See, Humans of New York was a photographer that just wanted to take pictures of 10,000 people around the city and catalog the city's makeup. And what originally was just a quick answer a couple questions so I can have a caption for the picture turned into something much longer, bigger. Over time, the pictures were less important, and what was more important were the stories being told. The wild popularity of Humans of New York tells a larger tale. It gives a community its humanity. It reminds us that we are connected, that we all have shared dreams and hopes. I'd like to share some stories with you today, as well as connect to the larger humanity behind them in talking about the legacy of Go. Gosh, okay. 2 years ago, the great Dave Cheney got up and stood where I stand right now to talk about the Go legacy. How will Go be remembered? How will future programmers reflect on Go? He talked about Go's defining emerging characteristics and posited on the future decisions to be made. At GopherCon this July, Russ Cox, the tech lead for the Go programming language, announced the start of work for Go 2.0. He also estimated that in 2017, Go programmers ranged from 500,000 on the low end to 1 million across the world. Given these current trends of Go as the language of the cloud native, foundational cloud infrastructure, we can expect the number of Gophers to grow significantly in the coming years. But who are these programmers? What do we know about them? Based on the attendance that I've had over the last 3 years, several dozen meetups, conferences, workshops, we observe that our community is largely a homogeneous group. Steve yesterday listed the challenges that this homogeny brings, namely a narrow perspective. And coupled with Go's technical governance, infrastructure, and compensated engineering efforts housed within Google, it has been sometimes perceived by those outside as elite, exclusive, and those without traditional pathways or degrees from top universities in computer science feel unwelcome, even if it's not explicitly stated. It means many of those who are not at Google or from the outside looking in, they feel, as Steve said yesterday, intimidated, unqualified, and unwelcome to contribute to Go. Many in the Go team recognize that this narrow viewpoint also brings blind spots. And as you heard yesterday, there are plans to expand the Go team to include more diverse viewpoints. Andrew Bonventure's story yesterday reminded us that we all bring value with the experience, lives, and skills that we've accumulated along the way. And it is this heterogeneity that breeds some of the most spectacular outcomes. This isn't opinion. The benefits of diversity have been proven scientifically. And I think we're all in agreement, so I won't belabor the point of the importance of diversity, but the gap between being more diverse and inclusive and the implementation. That's the tricky part. It reminds me of that how to draw an owl meme, where you have a couple of ovals as the start, and it's parroting sort of the how-to step-by-step, and you have two ovals in the beginning and then a very detailed owl in the middle. And what that parodies is that the details, the devil's in the details. And we've talked a lot about diversity and inclusiveness, but we've never talked specifically how to fill in that owl. So without clear and concise details, we're left feeling unsure of what to do next and left with a very unfinished product, which is a community that will be from many backgrounds and will be from many perspectives. So, the Go team, they need our help and feedback in finding ways to reduce the barriers, both structural and perceptual, to contribute to the Go community, particularly from people who've experienced these barriers firsthand. I'd like to talk about my barriers, or at least the ones I've sought to overcome. The first and most important barrier is filling what I call my perspective gap. 1 year ago in this very spot, Katrina Owens talked about mind the gap in last year's keynote. And I always think of the perspective gap when I hear this phrase, mind the gap. We all have perceptive gaps. We can't be omniscient. We are confined by space, time, a body, a family with characteristics we seek to transcend, validate, eradicate all at once. The purpose of an education, I would say, is to broaden our perspectives, not just attain skills. And I have found that my education in the school of life has given me its greatest lessons. I'll share 3 great lessons with you today. My first great lesson was on a grocery shopping trip when I was 22 years old. At the time, I had just finished college, and my college sweetheart, my boyfriend, and I went to the store together. I entered in the store and in the produce section, and I immediately went and did what I had always done up to that point, which was take some grapes off of the cluster that wasn't in the bag and just put them in my mouth. And my husband, when he saw that I had done this, instantly turned cold, walked away, and the rest of the grocery shopping was done in silence. I knew I had done something to offend him by taking these grapes. I just didn't know what. So we get back and we returned from grocery shopping, and I finally confronted him. Honey, what was it that upset you about that so I can know? And he said, someday you're going to have my children, and they're going to look at their mommy taking grapes and see that she can get away with it, but they won't be able to get away with it. You see, my boyfriend at the time was from West Africa. He'd spent most of his teenage years here in Brooklyn, and that was the moment that my white privilege slapped me in the face. And he basically said, if you're going to be with me, I need you to understand this and many more everyday acts of privilege that I don't enjoy, that you enjoy, and that you will need to model for your children. It would be the first. Over the many next 20 years, I did indeed have this man's children, married him, and had 3 children. But recognizing my privilege and talking about race continues to make me uncomfortable. As a recent talk given by Byron Woodfork from 8th Flight at Strange Loop last week, if we want to do anything about inclusion and diversity, we've got to get used to feeling uncomfortable. So it is about things like privilege, about my husband, blacks and racial minorities modifying and second-guessing so many little things in life to make the rest of us not freak out. Making sure my husband wears extra professional clothes, never going shopping in the 24-hour mart in the small town in the wee hours of the morning, so to get extra diapers or cold medicine for your babies because it's dangerous. Contemplating whether or not to wear a hood in -10 weather, or even having conversations after Trayvon Martin's death about whether it would be advisable to tell our own son to wear a hoodie or not. It's about having to explain to my kids why mommy can do all these things, but daddy can't. And it's about having to deal with all of this, every insidious incident, with equanimity, because if you don't, you're playing the race card or you're the angry minority. It's about kneeling during the national anthem to protest it all. Overcoming my obliviousness and uncomfort to my privilege is a barrier that I work on daily. And it's something that, without acknowledging, I can't begin to work with others on my team, to work with others that have shown up to Golang workshops, and those who want to be in this industry and don't look like me. My second great lesson started a year earlier and has been ongoing. After college graduation, I joined Teach for America. Does everyone know what Teach for America is? It's a national organization that takes volunteers to teach in the poorest communities, often in inner cities that are overwhelmingly Black and Latino and Asian and immigrant. And I got placed right here in New York City to teach in an all-girls high school on 56th and 2nd Ave. 22 years old and fresh with a diploma, with ideal optimism, I had a rude awakening. Stories of 14-year-old girls and the lives that they had to lead, pregnancy, abuse, being afraid of deportation. I needed to meet them where they were at, and this has stayed with me. And every time that I try to help somebody in this community, I always try to get a feel of where they're at, because I can't make assumptions. And I made a lot of assumptions when I was 22-year-old. This would serve me well in subsequent roles in nonprofits and in intercultural development and multicultural recruitment for students to attain STEM degrees to the nation's top colleges, and to also understand why most of our efforts over a decade would largely fail. I learned painfully how policies and design decisions would adversely impact people, both then and today in our industry. They make them feel othered, unheard, unwelcome, and this cuts across poverty, race, social class, intersectional standpoints. Lately, it's also made me think about the way we teach programming and why this also doesn't reach these groups. The third great lesson are the special needs of my children. I left my job because when my son was 2.5 years old, he stopped. He never spoke. And my excuses of just letting the kids learn on their own way in their own time, that wasn't working anymore. And after after a lot of assessments and doctor's visits, the final diagnosis was autism. That was a dark day. It was in September of 2010. And it's dark because all I had known was Rain Man, the movie Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman. But it led me to do something that I've told other people in the room before. My way of handling adversity or trying to understand a problem is similar to Matt Damon's character in The Martian, where he understands the inevitable and he can't do anything about it. And he says, I'm going to science the shit out of this. And that's what I did. I left to get a master's degree in applied behavioral analysis, the only ethical treatment for people on the autism spectrum. And eventually, after I finished my coursework and was on the cusp of thinking about pursuing it as a full-time career, I stopped. And I said, my goal was to be a lifelong advocate for him. And I will be. I also learned many things along the way. And that is that we all have different perspectives. And we have another axis of privilege, and that is a neurotypical one that rarely gets talked of. So I won't belabor what neurotypicality is because I want to get to other things, but it has helped me also understand when I see some things in our industry and you view it from that lens. It also helps me to get outcomes that I want through attacking it from a behavioral and analysis standpoint. In addition to these, the autism diagnosis was just the first. Later, my youngest would be born with a congenital malformation called spina bifida and tethered spinal cord, and that's ongoing. So understanding the needs of people with physical disabilities and also people with mental health issues as well. So You might say, Carmen, what do these stories mean about the legacy of Go? You might say, these aren't your barriers, those are other people's barriers. And that's the whole point. We enjoy the stories that we most identify with. We enjoy mentoring others with whom we see our younger selves. We resonate with the talks whose journeys are most like our own. But we also need stories that don't resonate, that we can't identify with. These stories aren't for us in this room. They're for those that we have yet to include, for anyone who has ever felt like they don't belong. Recognizing others' barriers has given me the perspective to help and reflect on my own, and the fastest way for me to fill my perspective gap. The quote I love to think over and over again, and I've told many people in this room, we see things not as they are, but as we are, by Anais Nin. So this brings me back to the title of my talk, The Legacy of Go. To me, I think it's important to talk about the legacy of Go. It's going to make its impact on the technical landscape as we see it changing. And I think Dave's talk had a lot of good points. But the most important legacy, perhaps also, is a personal one. And its most important resource is us, the collection of humans that make up the community. My favorite and most impactful Russ Cox quote, of which I've talked about and told the story before, inspired me to be here now. And it's the one that says, we need everyone, and everyone isn't here. So we need to include. This is the drawing the owl part of this talk. Inclusion goes hand in hand with belonging. Inclusion, like autism, is also a spectrum. Belonging is also intensely personal, and therefore attempts to do this at scale will not work. We need to understand people's stories, their perspectives, for active inclusion to work. If we do not intentionally include, we unintentionally exclude. And I want us to think about how we, each individually, can actively include the people noticeably absent from this room. I want more Black women in the Go community, not Black girls who code in 5 to 10 years when they graduate. Black women, now. Over the last 3 years and almost 24 Go events, conferences I've been to, I've seen only 3 total. We need more people with more perspectives to broaden our own, to work alongside and solve problems with fewer blind spots. And there is no magic or silver bullet. This is everyday acts of understanding and helping people, everyday building relationships, deciding to live with your own comfort, and accessing your shared humanity. So go forth and please seek this out. See what you can do about this. Not Go's leadership, not people on the Go team, you. We can do this one person at a time. It can only ever be done one person at a time. Read about active inclusion. If we all in this room devoted efforts to sponsoring or mentoring one person who is from a different background and has a different perspective from us, imagine the impact that they can have on the things that we make using Go. Other people have said it before, but it bears repeating. Software is happening within a larger context. Because if we argue the best way to do things in their implementation, we sometimes can miss the human aspect. And on our deathbeds, we aren't going to remember the code we wrote. We will remember the people we loved and hurt, the things we wish we could have done better with them, and making the world a better place, not necessarily with only the code we write, but with the people we worked alongside with doing it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carmen. Wasn't that beautiful? That was awesome.
That was incredible.
That really was.